everybody, it's Friday, so you know that means it's time for another Whiteboard series video. We're going to get to the board here in a second, but to kind of build upon our lesson from last week, if we want to call these lessons, we talked about the inverted yield curve and how that has had a tendency to lead us into a recession. So I want to talk about recessions and what they are, but we're not quite there yet. I want to take a step back and go to Econ 101. Financial literacy in America is not that great. And economics is even worse than just financial literacy. So I want to take you through the business cycle. Just real quick, I want to tell you what that is and show you where a recession falls and show you that a recession is a normal part of the business cycle that we always experience, to try to alleviate some of the fears of when that next recession comes, because it's going to come. We're not avoiding it. So I want to kind of lead you through how the business cycle works, show you where the recession falls, and then next week on Friday, the next Whiteboard series video, we'll actually talk about a recession, we'll define it, and maybe look at how it's not always like the recession we remember from 2008. So through the magic of my great editing skills, here in a moment we're going to hop back on right in front of the board. I'll show you on the whiteboard what the business cycle looks like. We'll talk about that, where recessions fall in, and then we'll be ready for next week's episode where we actually talk about a recession, define it, and maybe calm some of the nerves about the impending recession. If you listen to Jeffrey Gunlock, who's a very popular bond manager, he said we are getting closer to a recession, and to that I tweeted out the other day, well, no joke, every day that we don't have a recession is a day closer to a recession. So I don't know how great of a comment that was and how much insight he actually provided us, because every day that goes by we're one day closer. So anyways, let's take a hop over to the board, look at the business cycle a little bit closer, and I will see you to say goodbye here in a moment. Okay, so here we have a chart of what a business cycle looks like. And the business cycle is just basically the rise and fall of economic growth over time. This is just a drawing that I did. The peaks, the highs, the lows represent nothing. It's just, this is kind of the shape that we go. And this is something you learn in Econ 101. But the four real phases to a business cycle are: we have expansion, which you can just consider your period of time of growth. You have a peak where growth kind of hits that top, and this is where we see a lot of the euphoria and the FOMO when it comes to investing. And then we hit a recession. Well, sometimes you may see this part of the chart labeled as contraction, but this is when we would see the recession, and since that's what our next whiteboard is going to be about, I want to label it that way. And then we hit the bottom, the trough, and sometimes this is where we have the depression. It doesn't always end up being a depression, but if we have that big of a fall, that's where that falls. So your four main areas are expansion, peak, recession, and trough, and then it goes right back. So then when you bottom out and things seem like they're the worst, magically things recover and we start to go back into expansion again. There are a lot of numbers that can be spouted as to what defines the expansion, when we hit a peak. For today's purposes and keeping this short, that's not what we're going to go into. I just want you to know that there is a business cycle, that the economy goes through these ebbs and flows, and that's normal, and what are the parts of it. Again, we're going to come back next week and focus on this in a short video, mainly because there's a lot of fear surrounding around recessions. Rightfully so. They're not the most enjoyable experiences, but they are a natural progression in the growth of an economy. They happen regularly, and not every recession ties back to 2008, which is what we remember. Our hindsight bias, our recency bias comes into play as far as psychology works. So we'll focus on this, but now you know where that falls. We have expansion, and eventually we can't grow anymore. We kind of hit our peak. We contract and have our recession. We bottom out, and then we go right back into it. So that is the business cycle. That's all you need to know for this video's purpose. Next week we'll focus in on the recession, but there you have what the business cycle looks like. So there you have it. There's your business cycle. Now you know what it is. Now you know the regular parts to it, and this is a normal phenomenon that the economies go through. So I think it's very important for you to realize that when you hear about recessions, you hear about GDP growth and all these numbers that you might read about when it comes to financial media, this is all normal. What the numbers are may vary. When things happen will change, but it's important to know that this is normal. We go through these cycles. And don't get too spooked when you hear about these doom and gloom predictions that come out, because, as I've talked about before, no one really knows. So now you're armed with knowing what the business cycle is, what it looks like, where the recession term falls in. Next week we'll talk more about the recession, what it is, we'll define it, and talk a little bit about what to expect coming out of one of those. The reason I want to talk about this now before I let you go is I'm of the belief it's better to talk about things before they happen. So we know a recession is going to happen, and rather than talk about it and try to calm nerves and concerns while it's going on. I think it's better to get ahead of the game, talk about what it is, so that when it does happen, you will feel armed that, hey, you knew that was going to happen, you knew what it is, it's only a temporary thing, and it's actually a normal part of a healthy economy and healthy market, and hopefully that'll make it easier for you to rest through those rough times. My dad always told me the best time to look for a job is when you already have one, meaning don't go looking for a job when you're out on the streets. If you want to look for a good job, do it while you have the security of another job. Kind of the same approach here. Let's talk about what a recession is before it happens, so you know what it is, you're armed with it, and you can rest easy at night. So that's this week's whiteboard video. The business cycle, we've got expansion, peak, recession or contraction, and trough. So those are your parts. The recession's normal. We'll talk about that next week. We'll have a good weekend, and we'll see you in the next video.